Hi, my name is Dr. Lewis Pearson. I studied product design and a PhD in design communication here at UWTSD. I now work for the university, mostly delivering workshops and doing the odd bit of graphic design and video editing work. I'm not part of your course and I don't know very much about your course, but I've been asked to prepare a short video covering some useful skills that maybe you'll find helpful for preparing you for your future in terms of your future studies and maybe life beyond university. So I usually go around all the different courses of the university, delivering presentations to rooms full of strangers. So I'm pretty familiar with putting together presentations and some of the techniques you can use to keep your audience engaged. Though this whole pre-recorded video thing is a little bit new to me, so if this is a little bit rough around the edges, sorry about that. My plan for this session is to cover two different areas. First, we'll talk a little bit about effective presentations, constructing good narratives, that sort of thing. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to put together slides. And then the second half of this will be about your online presence, so the material you have about you that's online and the impression that might have on people. There'll be some tasks for you to do as we go along, but it won't be anything too taxing. So let's talk about pitching and presenting. To start with, let's try to answer a very simple question. What is the purpose of a presentation? Maybe pause here to have a think about it, maybe write some ideas down if you want to. Personally, I think all presentations can be boiled down to the delivery of information. I have information, I'm trying to get that information to you, and the method I'm using is a presentation. But it's not enough to just throw information at you, it has to be delivered in an effective way. In a way that means that your audience is able to remember it afterwards. If you can't recall it afterwards, has it really been delivered? So there are lots of different factors that usually influence how effective your presentation is, many of which I'm sure you're already aware of. A very efficient way to get your information across to your audience is to simply say it. Factors like the volume and the speed of your voice play a role here. You might have heard of the idea of presenting to the back of the room or projecting to the back of the room, but this very much depends on context. If it's a small room with just a few other people in the audience, then there's no need to shout. The volume should be appropriate to the environment. Making sure that the language is appropriate to the context is also important. And I don't just mean avoiding curse words. You should pay attention to the complexity of the language you're using, as it can make a difference to how easy it is to follow what you're saying. It may also give an indication of your level of knowledge about the subject. So it's about finding the right balance. If this video was for children, I might change up some of the language a little bit just to make sure the information is still being delivered efficiently. Your body language also plays a role. So your posture, whether you're crossing your arms, even your facial expressions, whether or not you're making eye contact, whether you're standing or sitting behind a podium or not, your decisions about these things should depend on the context. There's a context where standing behind the podium is appropriate, and there's a different situation where it's maybe more appropriate to walk around the room a little bit. There are even more subtle things, like how close you are to your audience, that can make a difference, both to how comfortable you feel and how comfortable they feel. How you look also plays a role. As with body language, there's no one size fits all. There's a context where wearing shorts and a t-shirt is perfectly fine, and a context where wearing a formal outfit would be more effective. It's about making sure your appearance is appropriate. This may also depend on the content of your presentation or pitch. If it's a serious topic, then perhaps dressing more formally makes more sense. And finally, your slides or visuals. Some of the information you want to deliver will be spoken, but some of it may be present just on your slides. Personally, I tend to think about slides as being a tool for the presenter as much as they are for the audience. They're helping me as I'm going through this remember what I need to say. Not all the information is there, but I've put the time and effort into designing these slides, and when the slide comes up, I'm reminded of what I was planning to say. We'll talk more about slide design a little bit later. So those are some of the basics. Next, I want to talk about the importance of adopting the right mindset when it comes to delivering presentations. I've watched a lot of presentations from students, and they tend to fall into one of two categories: the student mindset versus a more professional mindset. Let's break down what I mean by these terms. The student mindset is recognizable by the following kind of phrases. You may find yourself saying that you didn't know what to do when you started the project, or that you weren't sure which direction to take. You might talk about the things that your lecturer said and how that influenced you. You might start your presentation by saying something like, oh, but I thought we only had to do X, Y, and Z. These phrases are a sign that you're in a student mindset while delivering your presentation. With this approach, you'll find yourself focused on the journey. First I did this, and then I did that, and so on. You'll provide descriptions of what you've done, but you won't necessarily explain why you've made those decisions. Where you do provide justifications, they'll usually be based on personal preference. I chose this because I've always had an interest in it, or it's blue because I've always loved the color blue. And hopefully, after meandering through your presentation, you'll eventually arrive at some end result that your audience has been patiently waiting for you to get to. This kind of approach is easy. It's what happens when you don't prepare for a presentation. I certainly got away with winging it a few times during my degree, but the result was never very professional and certainly not very convincing. An alternative approach is what I've labeled here as the professional mindset, but the label isn't too important. In this mindset, your presentation is entirely focused on supporting the end result. Rather than providing a play-by-play walkthrough of what you've been up to during the project, well, first I did this and then I tried that, you start by outlining the end result. Instead of slowly building up the picture like you would with a student mindset, you present the full picture and then unpack all the decisions that led to that point. Your decisions are also supported by evidence beyond just your personal preference. I chose the color blue for its calming attributes as supported by this study over here and this other study over there. With this mindset, you'll typically use more convincing language. So rather than providing an endless account of what you've been up to with the audience patiently waiting to see where it's going, you're upfront with the important information, and then you spend your time supporting and defending your decisions. The focus is less on you and your journey and more on your work and what you've managed to achieve. The downside is that you can't wing it. You have to carefully plan the presentation. You have to work out what information needs to be included and in what order, but the result is a more confident and compelling narrative and presentation. There are sometimes cases where you're specifically asked to present a more chronological account of what you've been up to, a project update presentation or something similar. Even in these situations, you should pull out your main findings so far and start with those, and then take the time to explain how you arrived at those findings, supporting it with evidence. Here's a visual metaphor to help explain. Perhaps you had 10 different ideas at the start of the project. So one approach would be to run through each of these in order. First I did this led to this other idea, and then I found this, which led to this, and so on. And eventually I decided on this idea as being my main idea, or the final piece, or my conclusion. The professional approach leads with that final outcome. Then the other ideas are still discussed, but only in the context of how they led to and support your main point or idea. This isn't a fixed rule. Maybe there are multiple main points supported by previous decisions, but hopefully you get the idea. Let's talk about constructing compelling narratives. I mentioned earlier that presentations are about delivering information. This can be boiled down even further to answering two simple questions. What information do I need to deliver, and in what order? Crucially, you need to know the answer to the first question before you start figuring out the order, because the order is highly dependent on what information is being considered. Here's another visual metaphor. You can imagine these blocks are individual pieces of information that make up your presentation, and your presentation moves from left to right through these blocks. The student approach slowly builds up a picture, hopefully arriving at some kind of conclusion by the end of the presentation, whereas the professional front loads their presentation, starting with the big conclusions, and then everything that follows is in support of that main argument. These blocks of individual information could be anything: a topic, a decision you've made, an idea you've had, a method you've used, a paper supporting that method. Even basic things like your name and the name of your project would be individual pieces of information that you need to consider when constructing your narrative. Usually at this point, if this was a physical workshop, I'd ask you to consider doing this with post-it notes for one of your projects, even a project you've already presented for or done in the past. The first task would be to gather as many post-it notes as possible with one piece of information per post-it note, and then explore potential narratives for that information. What happens if I start with this post-it note? What happens if I start with this other post-it note? What happens if I reverse the order entirely? Feel free to pause here for a bit if you want to take some time to try this out. Okay, let's move on. I'm not a big fan of scripting presentations. This presentation is scripted, and you can probably tell it's usually more effective to be as familiar with your presentation as possible so that a script is not needed and you can react in real time to what's going on. That said, it's usually a good idea to script the very first thing you plan to say. It happens to everyone. You get up and stand at the front ready to deliver your presentation, and suddenly your throat dries up, your hands get all clammy, and all that great information you had in your head just vanishes. Having a clear idea of how you plan to start your presentation can help you get over this initial uncomfortable moment, help you break the ice. And if you're going to script it, you can script something that does a good job of setting the context. There's a big difference between starting a presentation with a personal account of a time you nearly drowned versus providing a factual account of how many people drown every year. The two are similar and both very serious, but one is far more personal than the other. So if you're going to script the intro, use it as an opportunity to set a good tone for your overall presentation. Let's briefly talk about the design of your slides. You will obviously want to avoid using weird fonts or having paragraphs of text or bad color combinations, these sorts of things. And personally, I think you can usually avoid using templates like this completely. The slide should only really contain the information that's relevant and helpful. That weird orange shape in the top right corner is not relevant, and neither is the slide number or the date. Your slide should be carefully considered and only contain the information that's relevant to the point you're trying to make. And you can use subtle animations to draw your audience's attention even further. This effect is achieved by duplicating the slide, and on the second version of the slide, putting translucent boxes over the areas you want to fade out. So first you see the whole graph, and then you see the graph with some areas slightly hidden to draw the attention of the audience. Another common mistake people make is to not have the slide size set correctly, though this is not so much a problem nowadays as PowerPoint tends to default to the correct size. But make sure your slides are set to widescreen. To do this, go to the Design tab at the top, select Slide Size, and then choose Widescreen. You'll be surprised by how much of a difference this can make. I already mentioned how slide templates like this are often just distracting and not necessary. If you have a nice image that you want to show, just show the image. This is my cat Digby, by the way. And this is my friend's cat Lolly. If you don't have nice images to use, consider using unsplash.com for free high-resolution stock imagery. The Noun project is another great free resource for icons that you can use to couple with information on your slides, like I've done here. If you need to add a video to your presentation, don't just add a link like this, because you know that on the day of your presentation, the Wi-Fi will probably be down and you'll be panicking. You should embed the video directly onto your slide and set it to play automatically so you don't have to click on the video. And don't forget to make it full screen too, so it's more impactful. Perhaps use it as a title slide for your presentation. On the day of your presentation, I recommend using your own laptop so that you know that your fonts and layouts are all going to be correct. Even if you need to submit on a USB stick, hand over the USB stick and yank the cable out of the computer and put it in your own laptop. I mentioned earlier that I go around all the different courses delivering presentations, so I'm constantly in rooms I've never been in before. So I'll always try to sneak in the day before and check that everything works properly and make any adjustments to my presentation if necessary. Oh, and if you're using your own laptop, make sure you turn off Wi-Fi. Don't forget to finish your presentation properly. Don't just run out of slides, then click too many times and close the presentation completely. A quick tip is to go to Slideshow along the top and then set up Slideshow and set it to loop continuously until escape. This means that the presentation won't close when you reach the end. It'll instead just loop around to the start, which is fine. Your first slide is a perfectly reasonable slide to end on. This might sound like a trivial thing, but it's the small things like this that contribute to a more professional presentation and peace of mind when you're delivering it. I mentioned before that I'm not a fan of scripting presentations, but if you're going to script the very first thing you're going to say, you might as well script your outro as well. Even if it's something as simple as "thank you, any questions," knowing how you're going to end your presentation can be really useful. Feel free to pause here for a minute or two, go get a glass of water or something. We're about to change topics. So, change of topic. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about your online presence. What information is there online about you? First, a quick question to think about. Why is this even important? Well, employers use social media to screen candidates. They get their stack of job applications through, and some will immediately sit there and search online for each and every one of them to see what they can find. They're doing this for two reasons. To verify information about you. So you've said on your application that you have a degree and that you work for a certain company. Is there any evidence online for this? And second, to do a character check. You've said you're a friendly and hardworking person, but your latest tweet is not very appropriate. The golden rule is that if it's online and it's public, then it's part of your professional image. Another reason why this is important is that all companies have a social media presence that they'll want to protect, and they'll want to be sure that hiring you is not going to damage their online reputation. Other reasons, maybe you could have an online portfolio to showcase your work to potential clients or employers, and potentially sell your work. Your online presence can also be used for professional networking, connecting with people after an event, gaining useful contacts, that sort of thing. So this part of the presentation has three themes. We're going to do some activities to help you map your current online image and usage. We're going to develop a plan for our future online image and usage. And we're going to put some of those presentation techniques I mentioned earlier to good use by taking notes in PowerPoint. So as you're watching this part of the video, you might want to pause here, open up PowerPoint or something similar, and start taking some notes on slides. PowerPoint is great for note-taking because you can easily create new slides, gather the information you need, and then change the order to create compelling narratives. You won't necessarily be asked to deliver this presentation, but you can use this as an opportunity to practice in a low-risk scenario. The end result should be a presentation that answers those key areas I mentioned, an overview of your current online image and usage, and a plan for what you're going to do going forward. So let's start trying to gather the information needed to address those two areas. Feel free to pause at any point and fill in some information on your slides. First question, what social media platforms do you use and why? Do you use Facebook? What about Instagram? Do you have a YouTube account and leave comments on videos? What about a LinkedIn account? For your presentation, you could just make a list of the profiles that you have and the reasons why you have them, but later you might want to grab some screenshots of those profiles and design more interesting looking slides. Next, I want you to put your name into a search engine to see what you can find. So what do these results say about you, if anything? What words might a potential employer or client associate with you if they found your profile, or if they couldn't find anything at all? So hopefully we've mapped a little bit about our current online usage. Next, let's think about how we can improve our online image and make better use of these social media platforms, not just for personal use, but for professional use too. So let's think about the impression that we would want to put across to a potential employer. What words would you ideally want to be associated with? Once you have some words, next you need to consider how you might achieve that impression. For example, a wedding photographer might show that they're friendly and reliable by having good reviews on their portfolio site. Or a jewelry designer might show that they have an eye for detail by showing macro images of their work. What evidence can you present that might help you achieve those words that you're aiming for? And which platforms best showcase that evidence? Let's talk about LinkedIn. In short, LinkedIn is an online CV, a networking tool, and a job searching tool. Here's my profile on LinkedIn. It contains a short description about me, a list of my experiences and qualifications, my publications, projects I've been involved with, awards, and loads more. It's essentially an online CV. It also contains a list of skills that I've said I've got, along with how many other people have verified that I have those skills. LinkedIn is massive. It's Microsoft's largest acquisition to date. So by having a LinkedIn profile, you can benefit from their investment in search engine optimization, which means that your LinkedIn profile is quite likely to show up on the first page of Google search results. LinkedIn can also be used as a research tool. You can find people doing the sorts of jobs you want to be doing and find out the journey they took to get there, look at their past experience and qualifications, and map out the path that they took. LinkedIn is also about growing a professional network so you can connect with people. But don't do this until you're happy with your profile, because as soon as you invite them to connect, they'll get a notification and may look at your profile straight away. You can also add a note to your invitation to connect, to introduce yourself, explain maybe why you're trying to connect with them, mention a common ground, that sort of thing. So for your LinkedIn profile, make sure you choose a professional image, something that's appropriate and says a little bit about you. Make smart connections. Don't just connect with everybody, because a lot of people on LinkedIn are using it for marketing, so they're just trying to gather as many connections as possible. Always keep your profile up to date. If you decide to set one up today, don't just leave it then for months and months and months. Return to it and keep it up to date with the latest information about you. And you can use it for networking after events. So we've looked at our current profile and we've explored some ideas for what we might want to do in the future. Now it's essentially over to you. Hopefully you've made some notes on your slides. Consider spending the next half hour or so turning those notes into a presentation using the tips from the first half of this video. So remember the points I made earlier about gathering the information first, then exploring changing the order to create compelling narratives. Remember you can use stock imagery or take screenshots of your profiles and include those on your slides. And grab some free icons from the Noun project. So I've pretty much run out of things to say. I hope you found this video interesting. Please feel free to get in touch. My contact details are on the screen. I'm happy to critique any presentations you're working on or your social media profiles. Just get in touch. All the best.